This show is produced by the Harwood Podcast Network.
Hi, I'm Cindy Harris, and we love making this show available to you free of charge. If you'd like to help us keep it that way, make a contribution to our Karma Jar. For more information, visit our website. Today I'm making this delicious chicken noodle soup. About a month ago I got an email from Zachary up in Washington State, and he was asking me if I'd share my chicken noodle soup recipe. The thing that's really great about this soup is it's got a lot of really fresh vegetables and herbs in it, so it's a nice light brothy soup but with great vegetable and chicken flavor. I'm going to start by getting my large soup pot out, and we're going to be cooking a whole chicken, and that's what's going to create the delicious broth for our chicken noodle soup. Now when you do get a whole chicken, it's important that after you bring it home that you clean it by taking out any of the parts that are inside of it, rinsing it under some cool water. And when we go to place the chicken in the pot, if you look at it this way, this is the breast part here. We want to turn this upside down and put that on the bottom. And then I'm going to take cold water and I'm going to put in enough cold water till it covers the chicken completely. Now today that took about 32 cups of water, but it's going to depend on what size your chicken is. The thing you just want to make sure is that water is completely covering that chicken. I'm then going to add 1 tablespoon of salt. Now I'm going to place the lid on top, and I'm going to take this over to the stove and put it on a high heat. I want to bring that water to boil. Now while the chicken and the water is coming to boil, we're going to start getting our vegetables ready. And we use all kinds of great vegetables and herbs in this soup. Half of it we use in the actual creation of the broth, and then the other half we'll cut up later and add to the soup as we're finishing it off. So let me show you what we're going to be adding to the broth once the water comes to boil. I like to get a big handful of dill. I just rinse it thoroughly, along with a big handful of parsley. Again, I'm just going to leave these whole, so I'm going to leave them on the side of my board. Next, I have 3 nice big cloves of garlic. I'm just going to take my knife and give them a whack and kind of crush them. And I'll put that on top of my herbs. Now I have a big bunch of celery. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to cut off the bottom. This is what they call the heart. And I'm just going to trim that bottom edge off, and I'm going to put this whole thing in the soup. And I'm also going to trim off the leaves and add that into the broth. Now I'm going to take half the celery and set that aside to add to the soup later. And the other half, I'm just going to cut this into some big chunks, and that will go into our broth. I have 2 parsnips. One I'm going to set aside for the soup and one I'm going to keep for the broth. I'm just going to trim the ends and chop that into some big pieces. I have 1 large onion. I'm going to cut that in half, save half for the soup, and I'll peel the other half and cut it in quarters. That'll be for the broth. And lastly, I have 2 pounds of carrots, and I'm going to pull about 1 pound of them out, trim the ends, cut them into some large pieces, and these will go into the broth. The rest will go into the soup. So I'm going to put the other half of my onion, my parsnip, and the rest of my celery here, and we'll deal with these vegetables later. Now you can see that this broth has got a lot of great fresh flavor to it, and that's one of the things that some broths are missing. They just cook the chicken in water, but I like to add a lot of these vegetables, and it not only brings great flavor, but a lot of the nutrients from the vegetables gets into the broth as well. Now as the soup comes to boil, you're going to start to see some of this foam start to float to the top. And I take my skimmer and lift that out and put that into a bowl. Then I'm going to put all the vegetables and herbs in the pot, along with some black pepper. I'm going to push the vegetables down, put the lid on, but leave it ajar, and I'm going to turn the heat down to medium. And I'm going to let this simmer for about 2.5 hours. Now the broth has been simmering for about 2 hours, so it has a half an hour left. So at this point, I do want to get the rest of my vegetables cut up. Now you'll notice that when I made the broth, I didn't bother peeling the carrots or the parsnips, but I am going to do that for these finished vegetables that I put into the broth. I'm going to start with the celery, and I'm going to split it and then chop it. And I basically want everything to be about a medium-sized dice. Now I'll move the celery on the one side of my board, and now I'm going to peel my parsnip. And I'll slice the ends off. Now, this is kind of a tough root vegetable, so I want to be careful when I'm cutting it. I don't want to slip around. I'm going to cut it in half this way. That way I can set it flat on end, and I'm going to cut it into some planks like this, and then I'll take a couple of those together, cut them into some strips, and then rotate it and run my knife through it. Then I'm going to peel all the rest of my carrots, and again take the ends off, and I'll cut these in half and then in half lengthwise. Now for these pieces, this is actually a good size. These are a little thick, so I'm going to split those again, and then I'll make them into some sticks and run my knife through them. So now you'll notice that all the vegetables are about the same size, and I like to have it that way. That way they cook nice and evenly. And then lastly, I have my onion. I'm going to peel it. I'm going to take and I'm going to cut it horizontally a couple of times. And then I'll run my knife into it 4 or 5 times. And then once I put my blade this way, then it chops up. So here are the rest of our veggies. Now I just have to wait for the broth to finish simmering. Now the next thing we need to do is separate the broth from these cooked vegetables and the chicken. Now there's a couple of ways you can do this. I have this large container here, but you could also use a large bowl or several large bowls if you need to. But you're definitely going to want a colander or some kind of strainer. So I just use a big spoon and I start lifting the vegetables and the chicken out. So I am going to want to pull the chicken off the bone, but that's got to cool down a whole lot. Now this is a big piece of chicken. I'm just going to move it onto this little plate here, but you can see it's just falling off the bone. Now this pot is a little too big and heavy for me to lift, so I just have my big 2-cup measuring cup, and I'm just going to pour that broth through the colander. But you want to be able to strain all these pieces of chicken. Many times there are little pieces of bone. We want to get all of that out of the broth. I have most of the broth out. I think I can lift this up. I want to make sure I have absolutely nothing left in that pot. Now I'm going to take my spoon and I'm going to kind of press down on those vegetables and the meat, because again there's more juice in there and I want to get as much of that flavor out as I can. I'm just going to set this to the side on a bowl, and then I'm going to take my strained broth, I'm going to put it back in the big pot, Now that the broth and the chicken are separated, I'm just going to let everything sit for about 30 minutes, and here's why. I like to let the broth sit for about a half an hour and let it cool just slightly so that the fat that was rendered out of the chicken can kind of rise to the top and I can scoop that out. It also gives the meat a chance to cool a little bit. That way it's a little easier for me to pull that chicken apart. Now you can see it starts to collect here up at the top, so I'm just going to take my spoon and spoon that out. Now I'm going to take the broth back over to the stove and put it on a high heat and bring it back to boil. Now the chicken is cooled down enough that I can easily handle it, and I'm going to pull it apart into some pieces just like this. Now you can be as particular as you'd like about the chicken. I definitely want to get all of that breast meat. Here's a leg. The thing you want to be careful is you don't want to get any bones or gristle. So just pick through it very carefully. But again, just do as much as you want. Now this is the chicken that I'm going to put back into the soup, and all the bones and the vegetables that I cooked in the broth, these were done with. So I'm just going to let them cool the rest of the way, and then we'll go ahead and toss those out. Now my broth has come up to a boil. I'm going to put in my chicken and the rest of my vegetables. I'm going to give that a stir. Turn it down to a medium-high. Put the lid on a jar and let this cook for 30 more minutes. Now the very last thing I'm going to do is measure out 2 cups of some egg noodles. And after a half an hour, it's time to take and put our egg noodles in. I'm going to give that a little stir and let that cook for about 10 minutes. You can see here the noodles are nice and tender, as well as the vegetables, all that great chicken. This soup is ready to serve. Now if you'd like to try this chicken noodle soup at home, go to our website and go to the Soups On show notes. I'll have the recipe there for you. If you do make it, make sure to send me a photo so I can send you the soup badge. We hope you'll join us on Facebook, and as always, if you have any questions or ideas for me, please send me an email. I'll see you next time.